Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
And I am Chris Clements.
And we are truly honored today. We have Lisa Atkins
I'm
in our
so
midst.
excited.
And for old timers, remember Lisa
For
Jackson.
old timers.
I was wondering where you were
For
going
those
with
of
that.
you
Yeah.
who've been around Arizona politics for the last 40 years,
Right.
like
Oh,
we
thank
have,
you. Yeah.
or 50, 40 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Lisa is, for those listeners who don't know who Lisa Atkins is, she's an institution in Arizona. She was the longtime chief of staff to Congressman Bob Stump. And
Oh my gosh.
then was, I don't know, all kinds of different things. A congressional candidate herself. The thing
we
that
just
you
skip
did
right-
that I didn't do,
Yeah. We just
I skipped out on that. And was the state land department, the head of the state land department under Governor Ducey.
Was it Greater Phoenix Leadership before that?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Greater Phoenix Leadership. Forgot about that. And then, and you've been on the CAP, or the Center for Arizona, or Central Arizona Project
Yeah.
Board, controls water, for a number of years now.
Since Congressman Stump's retirement.
Oh, wow.
Governor Hall called and said, there's a vacancy on the CAP board. Bob Burns had just been elected to the Corporation Commission. And if there's a vacancy on the CAP board, it's up to the governor to fill it. And her basic message, and I had known her for a long time, she was actually my representative in the legislature. She said, you've just spent 20 some odd years working on authorization and appropriation for the Central Arizona Project. There's a vacancy, and you're going on the board. I said, Governor, I don't have a job yet. She said, you'll find a job. I need you on the CAP board. So I'm very pleased that she did that. It's been one of the most educational things to do. We just got back, the board just got back from a trip around where the headwaters of the CAP water comes from. And it's a vital part of Central Arizona.
Is there anything good to report? Or
Yes,
is there
we have
some
water.
doom and gloom?
No, we have, we're in a drought,
Yes.
but we have water. And one of the reasons we have water is because we manage that asset very well. But remember, we've gone through times of not having any water and times of having so much that we didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it is fascinating because I think people don't quite understand how much planning Arizona has done for how many decades they've done it to be prepared for a time like this when we have growth and we have a lot of people here. I mean,
And a lot more coming.
Decades ago, when we were just a sparsely populated state, the forefathers of the state had the wisdom to say, you know what, we're going to need to be prepared for growth. And, frankly, I think they did a pretty good job of getting a pretty decent allocation of water for Arizona.
particularly if you look at it within the land ownership of the state of Arizona and recognize that so little of the state is private property. You have Bureau of Land Management land, you have National Park Service land, you have National Forest land, you have military land. And in the whole of everything, you don't have that much private property.
Yeah.
In order for that private property to reach its best efficiency, you have to be able to grow things on it, and you have to have water. Whether you're growing a business or a community or whatever, you have to have water. And if you look at the history of the state, people went where the water was. So the generations of Arizona leaders that came up with the idea for the Central Arizona Project ensured that we would have a vital future in this state. And we do.
Yeah,
and SRP.
Yeah.
It's not just CAP. It's Salt River Project actually led.
Well,
that.
and it is an amazing legacy that so few people really even recognize. This wouldn't even be possible. We wouldn't have the kind of growth and economic vitality that we have in the state, but for all the stuff that went on. And there is, I don't think people recognize how important this stuff has been, because when new development comes, they have to have a 100-year water supply. Well, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That means that we're going to be around for a long time, doing fine, even in the middle of a drought. Yes, we need to conserve and we need to do the things that make sense, but it isn't doom and gloom.
No, not at all.
Well, it's not doom and gloom in Phoenix. If you lived in Tucson for as long as I did, it's always doom and gloom when it comes to water.
That's just a mentality.
I spent a fair amount of time in Tucson too, and I think they're doing quite well.
They're doing better than they were. But growing up there, you'd think that we were going to run out of water tomorrow.
I'm older than you are. I don't remember those conversations. I just remember water was absolutely necessary if you were working as a day camp counselor and on the swim team at Lighthouse YMCA,
Oh, yeah.
which was
There
within
was
walking
that.
distance of my house. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, Lisa, the one, it's fascinating to watch your career with Congressman Stump, and
Who
that's
was the
long time
maybe one of our greatest statesmen, congressmen, mentors. I mean, we can go down memory lane just a little bit
without fail. I mean, and I think that his character was. I mean, it was so obvious that you two were such a great match for you to be his chief of staff. Back then, it was called AA.
Yeah,
administrative
I
assistant.
still refer to it as
Still refer to it as AA.
Hi,
Top
I'm the
staffer.
Congressman's AA, and people would go, "What?
What is that?
Yeah.
But I'll never forget it. So, we met back in 93. I was just a kid trying to help a guy who wasn't supposed to win a congressional race. You were very instrumental in advice on that. John Shaddy gets elected. I go back to D.C. for the first time as an adult. I went when I was 8 years old, but I fly back to D.C. for the transition. And you had said, come to our office. We'll get you set up because, we had resumes to go through and staffing to take care of. And so I go to Congressman Stump's office, and Lisa's there, and she's like, I want to put you right here, and you can do all your stuff. It was the congressman's desk in his office.
Yes, I know.
Because he never used his office.
But I was like, what is going on?
So,
and it gets better.
Oh,
So I've got boxes on Congressman Stump's desk going through resumes, stacks of paper, and all of a sudden there's a little knock on the door, and the congressman comes in with the Secretary of Navy and says, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, we'll go find somewhere else to meet. And I was like, no, this is your office. That's the Secretary of Navy. Okay. I am going to leave.
You were doing important things, though. You were getting together a new congressional office. Okay,
look,
try being a recent college graduate who basically was told, who's pounding the pavement in Washington, D.C., looking for his first job, and is using, Lisa Atkins here as both, someone who can make some phone calls. And I don't know, you took a liking to me, which was so sweet and kind.
She really took pity.
She took pity on me is what it was.
No.
And I would go to the congressman's office when I was on the Hill just to follow up with phone calls, to check my back then message machine.
Probably in his office.
And she would do the same thing. Go into the congressman's office, use his office. It's not a problem. The same thing happened to me. I'm in there. I'm checking messages. I'm making phone calls. He walks in with like some delegation. And he goes, "Oh, Chris, you're in here. Okay, we'll go somewhere else." I'm like, no.
It was just he was so humble, and you were so gracious. I mean, I could not have gotten through the first. Well, I don't know. I wouldn't have gotten through my career as a congressional staffer, but for you.
I wouldn't have had my first job if it wasn't for Lisa.
Well, there's
no way.
All right. So let me jump in here.
Okay. Sorry for all this adulation, but it's
no,
just
really,
it's true. You can't say enough.
Morton would have never given me the time of day if Bob Stump had not called him up and said, "This is a good kid. You need to hire him." Yeah. No way.
So when I was growing up in Tucson, it just so happened that my swim team coach was also a member of the legislature, and I was aware of the model legislature program. Fred Duvall and I were both in the program, and you get to understand how things work. And Bill Jaquin happened to be the president of the Senate. More importantly, he was my swim team coach at the Lighthouse YMCA. And I just followed down that path of model legislature. Once you step into that process and realize the diversity of the people who are engaged and the potential of what you can learn and do, you never want to walk away. I still am attached to that program. In fact, I went this year when model legislature was at the Capitol. Fred Duvall's a graduate of model legislature. We all went through that. The other thing that had been present were acquaintances or family friends that had been interns. So I wanted to intern at the legislature. That's how I met Bob. I had no idea. I mentioned Bill Jaquin's name, not because I thought it was going to do me any good, because Jaquin was a Republican and Bob Stump was a Democrat. And there was something about that class, and I had not only got accepted into the program, but got assigned to the president's office. Mm. Everybody wanted to work for the president and the speaker, so I guess that's the only thing I put down. But he had the last choice. He had the last word to say about who went where. And that's how I ended up in the president's office interning. Charlie Thompson was the staff director.
That's going way back.
And so that also happened to be the year that John Conlon and Sam Steiger decided to run against each other for the United States Senate when Senator Fannin retired. That's when Senator DeConcini was elected. And the next thing I know, after a very lengthy campaign, Congressman Stump won. Obviously he won. And he was walking through the headquarters right before we finished some of the last mailers that we were doing. And he kept walking. As you recall, he walked everywhere very fast. Yeah. And as he walked by, and I was sitting with Nancy Stump, we were working on some last minute project for the campaign. He said, "What are you doing in January?" Mm. I said, "I don't know." And he kept walking. That evidently was my interview for potentially going to Washington, D.C. if he won the election. So Charlie and Kay Thompson went back. Charlie was Bob's first chief of staff. And I went back to work on the legislation. So I haven't been at the legislature, so I was his legislative assistant.
That's amazing.
Yeah, kind of fun.
And
what
year did he switch to Republican?
It was after Reagan was elected.
Yeah, I was going to say when Reagan was elected.
Yeah. And that's not necessarily because it was Reagan. It was a statement that Jim Wright, who was the majority leader in the House, before we went to August recess, went to the well of the floor and made a statement, because that's when the boll weevils, that's when the conservative Democrats had given the Republicans, had given Reagan the ability to get his tax cuts and spending cuts back or done. And Wright went to the majority leader of the House, went to the well as we were breaking for recess, and made it abundantly clear that the speaker was going to exercise whatever he needed to exercise to try,
punish these guys.
Yeah, punish wasn't the word, but yeah. So
they didn't stay in line, and they were going to get punished.
They were doing what they told their constituents they were going to do. The spending was out of control, taxes were out of control, and they voted to bring them back into some reasonable area to cut spending and taxes. And they kept their word. And they were referred to as the boll weevils.
The boll weevils.
And the minute
I don't know if I knew that.
Yeah.
The precursor.
They weren't the blue dogs.
Yeah,
they were the boll weevils.
Precursor
to the blue dogs.
Right.
Yeah. The Kemp Roth tax cuts. Gosh, that takes me back. Takes me back to being 10 years old and being like, yes, this is great.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That's how crazy
he came back. He went out to the JP's office in Tolleson, who happened to be his uncle, and with his dad, and changed his party. Didn't make a big deal about it. There were several members who changed parties that made a big deal about it. Went to the White House.
Bill Graham was one of them.
Yeah. But Bob just very quietly came home, changed parties, welcomed with open arms, still retained a huge number of Democrats who had appreciated the work that he had done and knew why he was doing it. And he continued on until he retired.
His district was indestructible at the end, though. It was redder than red. People just loved him.
But it was a Democrat district, obviously, to start. And it showed the demographic shift in Arizona from the standpoint, not necessarily obviously the demographics changed, but the Democratic Party changed enough that many of the old-time Democrats either changed Republican or just voted Republican.
Well, it's like what Reagan said, I didn't leave the Democratic Party. They left me.
Right.
But we also,
and that continues for a lot of people.
No question, still
today.
continuing.
we
Look
also
at Tulsa
had
Gabbard.
we had a huge demographic change in the West Valley. When Del Webb built Sun City, it was out there all by itself, and soon you had Sun City. I mean, just look at how much the West Valley has grown.
Yeah.
And those were agriculture people who sold their property for businesses and everything, and he fit perfectly with that. There was a breakoff county. La Paz County was formed while he was in Congress, so he had everything west of the interstate in Maricopa, all of Yuma County. There was no La Paz at that time. All of Mojave, all of Yavapai, and all of Coconino. And one of the largest congressional districts in the United States.
Yeah.
And he went everywhere.
Yeah.
He really did.
Which is what you need to do.
Yeah.
He showed the way you have to manage districts like that.
Well, and not only that, he was an amazing legislator, not because, I mean, he just got a lot of stuff done. I mean, he never, I mean, I don't know.
He never took any credit.
Well, he never took any credit. He definitely took Reagan's advice about, it's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit.
Yeah.
But he also was there. I don't know how many votes he missed, but it was very, very few.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I remember when Shattuck first got elected, Shattuck was, I don't know, maybe a year or two into it, and he had a perfect voting record. And, because he was looking at Stump, and I remember John Kyle said to him, look, you need to miss a vote, because at some point you're going to have to miss a vote, and it's less anxiety to miss the second vote than the first vote. So miss a first vote so that you don't kill yourself on missing the second vote. But Bob Stump, I mean, you probably count on two hands how many votes he missed, right?
And I think part of that was his experience at the state legislature, being both in the majority and the minority, being an officer in the state senate, of recognizing that if you have the commitment of the voters to send you to do a job, you have a responsibility to do that job. So the most time he ever really missed was when his dad got sick and passed away. Other than that, he was there because he realized that was his job.
Yeah, amazing guy.
Yeah,
but
an amazing delegation, actually.
It was. It was
a unique time in Arizona's history.
Well, I would like to talk a little bit about that, because by the time, there was definitely a major shift in the delegation in '94, because you had John Shattuck, Matt Salmon, J.D. Hayworth were all freshmen.
Yeah.
And Kyle had just left the House and gone to the Senate. McCain was in the Senate. And you had Stump and...
That's right. Deacon Senior retired, right?
Pastor. And who am I missing? Who was in
Colby.
Tucson? Oh, Colby. Yeah. So it really was... So you had Stump, Pastor, Colby, and then all of a sudden you have three new people to team up with these.
But I think all of the members learned that from whomever was in the delegation before that. Bob Stump, as a Democrat, spent time working out of Mr. Rhodes' office. So the party affiliation in the delegation has never been a matter that would stop members working together.
Yeah.
It's part of the respect of the people's choice and who they're going to send back to Washington. And I think the delegation overall has worked together quite well. Did they always agree? No. But those disagreements were not in public. And you couldn't ask for two more different people than Mo Udall and Bob Stump. Really.
Yeah,
that's true.
That is true.
No matter what party they were in. But the two of them knew where their roots were in Arizona, had participated in a lot of the growth of Arizona, and had a very good respect for each other's positions. So when we started, as you both know, land and water issues are my favorite. Congressman was on the Armed Services and the Intel Committee and the Veterans Committee. But I had an opportunity to work on that, and it was at a time when we had a lot of federal land that needed to be identified for wilderness areas and open space, and how it was going to impact the ability of the state to grow, because the majority of the land in this state is owned and managed. And we all work together. So to have a Mo Udall and a Bob Stump be able to reach a consensus on how we were going to treat an issue like that it impacted everybody, not just in the state, but anybody who wanted to use public lands, I think is a testimony to the history of the delegation. The delegation has generally worked together quite well.
Yeah.
On issues in particular that affect the state.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting to watch because I think that as I look at it, I do feel like the Arizona delegation does work more closely together than almost any other delegation that I had any insight on, particularly New Mexico. You'd think that they would have been more cohesive, but they haven't been nearly as cohesive as Arizona. I think Arizona's benefited a lot from the fact that we've had strong bipartisan work ethic amongst the delegation. And, I think that still continues. There are definitely the tone in Washington is obviously very different than it was than when we were there. But I think the delegation still probably for the most part puts Arizona first. But boy, it's not the same. That's for sure. What do you think that, you've watched challenging times. This has been a challenging time from a just civil discourse. Is there hope in the future? Or is it just going to...
There's always hope in the future.
I love it.
If you say there's not, we have a problem on our hands. I keep holding on to that. And I think part of it is a generational change, and whether or not your parents were engaged in voting or in a civic organization. Mine were. My mother was president of the PTA at Peter Howell. There's nothing like having your mother as president of the PTA when you're in school. My dad was a Rotary member in Tucson and here, and that's just the way the Lighthouse Y was within walking distance. And so if you have that type of involvement in your community, you can extend that to other things. But it's also having good role models, and it's knowing who your elected officials are, and not just knowing, but being willing to have enough information to vote.
Yeah.
Because then you have somebody you can talk to.
Right. Well, and I you talk about role models, and boy, your mom was an amazing role model. I was blessed to get to know her during Shattuck's campaign, and she was one of those people who was just a valiant and consistent volunteer. And I learned so much from her, and just a number of the older women who were the volunteers as a kid. I was 22 years old. It just was so astounding how much wisdom I was able to just glean from listening in as they're stuffing envelopes, talking to each other about whatever they were talking about. And just, there was always a sense of they were there for a purpose, which was their civic, that they viewed as their civic duty. And man, that was so impactful for me because, I grew up in a fairly civic-minded home, but to see that, in real life outside of my own home and to be in that kind of a situation was just
I thought everybody did that.
Yeah, I'm sure you thought
My dad was in Rotary. My mother was in PTA, including president of the PTA, which is always interesting when you're still in school. They set the pattern. So there was no question. And there was no question that when we were living in Tucson that I would be a day camp counselor and part of the High Y group and on the pool staff at the YMCA, because Lighthouse Y I could literally walk to. So when you have that type of stewardship in your family, you take it on as a responsibility.
And it's something I think that young people need to learn. We all need to carry it on.
But they need to have examples.
Yeah, that's the thing. I had some great examples, and I guess it behooves us to step into that breach and be that example. And hopefully we can. I've got a second batch of kids, so maybe I can get a second chance.
But you're also, I appreciate your reflection on the delegation for what it was, and I guess it continues to a certain extent. But that time of respect in our politics was so much different, and even from a business standpoint. And you mentioned role models. I can remember the 1984 election, and Jim Colby had just defeated Jim McNulty. And I wanted to go to the Colby party. My dad was like, we'll get there, but we're going to go to the McNulty party first. And I said to him, I go, why are we going to that party? And he said, because Jim McNulty's a good man, and I'm going to go shake his hand.
And he had served the state.
And he served the state,
Yeah.
and he's a friend.
Right.
And that stuck with me my entire life. Completely stuck with me in all my ins and outs of politics, and being at the leadership and being in Washington, leading our family company and being in Washington and having real relationships with members of our delegation, because they're serving the state. They have the best interest in the state in their heart, and they work really hard.
And it's no different than running a business.
No.
In order to keep your customers, you have to be aware of what they want, and you have to be able to respond to that. Service is it.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. It's public service.
Yeah. So I just want to say to our listeners, I mean, if you look at the ranker everywhere else, we were actually very lucky to have the delegation that we have. We can disagree. We can agree to disagree. But at the end of the day, and we make fun of some of them on this show from time to time.
I'm shocked.
Because that's, that's what we
shocked.
have to do. But at the end of the day, they're good people trying to do the best they can.
Well, and I think that's a really important point, is that
even Mark Kelly,
they are good people. I mean, and we get so, I mean, we've talked about this before, that politics has in some ways become the new religion for some people. But there becomes a very tribal nature, and people really start to hate the other side.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't. It's just so.
It doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't move the needle. It doesn't get anything done. It doesn't allow. I mean, there's no ability, particularly in the House right now, where you don't have any extra votes to get anything done. This is a unique time in history.
That seems to be lost on some people in the House.
But one of the lessons that hopefully will come out of that is look at what you have in common, and then figure out how to resolve the rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah, and
you couldn't get two more different members of the congressional delegation than Mo Udall and Bob Stump, particularly when it came to natural resource issues. If you look at a map of the state of Arizona and realize how little private land we have to build an economy, and everything else is owned or managed by the federal government, for the delegation to come to a conclusion about wilderness areas that are forever, about funding and work for the Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, every federal agency that touches this state, that required every member of the delegation. So if you can have two members as diverse as Bob Stump and Mo Udall, anything is possible.
Yeah.
And there are places all over the state that you can point to with
Yeah.
that. Both of them native Arizonans. Their commitment was to the state and the people they served, not to anything else.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why their legacies are so endearing even
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
Well, but really for us, the legacy is you.
Well,
because you did take us under your wing. I mean, I can't say enough about the mentorship.
You're going to make me cry.
Yeah, he's good. Yeah, and I'm going to be right there with you. So that happened when no, stop. that was rude on my part, wasn't it?
That's okay.
So remember 1976, who was the minority leader in the House? John Rhodes. Guess where we went when Bob was elected? I mean, he worked with Mo, Congressman Udall, but Congressman Rhodes was incredibly, because it was not only Bob, it was also Eldon Rudd.
Yeah.
So you had two new members of the delegation, and our members of Congress who were seated at the time went out of their way, irrespective of the party affiliation, to make sure that those two new members of the House, and Dennis DeConcini, that they were taken care of, that they understood, where they needed to go if they wanted something, helped with their committee assignments. Arizona came first, not your party, not the fact that you were in the House, but Arizona came first. And the delegation has, for the most part, lived by that for decades and decades. And I think that's why this state looks like it does today. If you look at the land ownership pattern, I think that's why we've gotten a lot done. Look at our military installations that we've been able to keep in the state of Arizona and enhance at a time where Many people wanted to shut some of them down.
Right.
If you look at a number of things, wilderness areas in the state of Arizona, which was not an easy thing for all of our members to do.
Right.
Okay, one in particular, because he was a multiple use advocate and locking that land up. But look at what it's done to enhance everything else we have in the state. It was a different time.
Yeah.
And we were a small state and had to really work together.
Well, and you as
And the personalities in the delegation were different. I think.
very, yeah.
Well, they were very unique, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was very colorful personalities. But it does, I mean, going back again, I mean, I think that the staffing it was a critical part of that. And I think it really helped that the staff worked well together. And I'll never forget how you guided the delegation staff through the redistricting process in 2001. I mean, that was we had a commission for the first time, and there was, there were 4 new members that had never gone through redistricting before, and it got tough.
But we also had very strong partners in Arizona who were, there was an ongoing conversation with the legislature on both sides of the aisle. There was a friend of ours who, Alan McGuire, who was instrumental in all of that, who understood the process, who explained it to the delegation, and the delegation was willing to sit down and look at those proposals and say, this is important to me for this reason, this is important, and everybody worked together. And that was a unique experience.
Yeah. It was one of the most learning experiences I've
I
ever
Yes, it was.
bet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think it would have worked that way had the delegation not had a strong relationship of working together.
Well, it wouldn't have worked that way but for Bob Stump's leadership.
Well,
Because there
he
was
came out of the legislature.
yeah, there
so
was
that
some
was one thing.
tension, and I remember being in a meeting. It was the members and one staffer each, and you were there, and we were in your boss's office, and there was a little bit of an argument going on, and Congressman Stump said,
And when the door
"Listen,
opened,
yeah,
everyone was friends.
everyone was friends, but he got in their face, and he said, we have to come to a conclusion on this. We have to come together." And
And that was one of
We
the
did.
benefits of having been through some of that in the
Yeah.
state legislature.
Well, and he commanded respect from everyone.
Because he respected the people
Yeah,
he was
and
dealing
because
with.
he was so kind. Well,
Yeah.
well, a lot of it was because he was kind and he was generous and he was like, I mean, I go back to what I said before, like straight out of college, had no business sitting in a congressman's office, which, by the way, was the nicest office
very nice.
in Congress.
It was the same one for the entire time he was there.
It never, nothing ever changed, and it was the most beautiful office out of anybody else in the delegation. And to be able for him to take the time with me that he did, for you to take the time with me that you did, you have no idea what that meant.
No, it was huge.
But you have no idea how important it was for us to see people from home too, because if you don't do that and you're in the mix in Washington, you can lose your perspective on why you're there in the first place. That's why he came home every week.
That is such a great
and his
point.
part, yeah.
The bubble
can't-
is real, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
If you lose that touch, and in those days, Congressional District 3 was basically the western half of the state. So you didn't have the luxury of staying in Washington and trying to, fax machines in those days. I don't want to bore your listeners because they can't even imagine the machine I'm about ready to describe. But yet, no, it was totally different. Technology was totally different. We didn't have computers, for heaven's sakes.
Right.
We did. All of the correspondence got typed.
Yep.
And it got typed with 2 different carbon copies so that it can be filed. There was a whole system. Yeah. It was much different.
A little slower.
Much different. Yeah.
Yeah, just slightly.
Yeah.
Just
Well,
slightly.
Lisa, we can't thank you enough for being our guest here, because it gives us a chance to one, thank you for your
Yes.
mentorship,
You're
and reignite our desire to mentor people, because I mean, what you did for me has been something I've tried to do for young people, because I tell people I wouldn't be where I am, but for a couple really key people, and Lisa Jackson at the time, Lisa Atkins, is one of those people. I literally, you were just a key part of my life and my career.
Thank you.
Oh, I would not have had my first job if it weren't for you and for Bob making phone calls for me. It just wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And that has carried me forward my whole life. And so I can't thank you enough.
Well, on his behalf,
Yeah.
he had a unique ability to read people, an absolute unique ability. I learned more from him than anybody else.
Yeah.
And holding on to that is something that I get to share, which is a wonderful gift.
And he had the nicest boots. I don't know why I just remember that.
Those
He had
were-
the nicest
okay.
cowboy boots.
They were custom made.
They were amazing.
Yeah, they were custom made as his suits were. Yeah.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
just
they
saying,
were
the suits were pretty
They were
ideal. But
incredible.
Yeah.
He'd walk in. The first thing I would do would be like, what was he got? Oh my gosh, look at those.
He was the most. He'd be the first one in line at the Longworth cafeteria in the morning for breakfast.
Of course.
5 a.m.
Yeah, because you eat early when you farm.
Yeah.
And there were a whole group of them. There was I think the most amazing time to me was the National Prayer Breakfast when he was chairing the National Prayer Breakfast, and the respect around the room. And those are international guests and both sides of the aisle, business community. And when you work for somebody that closely for that long, you forget what the perspective is from outside.
Yeah.
He was just amazing. Just absolutely amazing. And I'm very, very lucky to have spent the first 2 years. Charlie Thompson was his first chief of staff. Charlie had run the staff, was the staff director for the state senate, which is where Bob came from. That's how I met Bob. I was his intern. And so Charlie and Kay Thompson went back to Washington. Charlie was the first chief and got everything set up. And Charlie returned to Arizona. And the next thing I knew, that's what I was doing. And it was a great partnership. We had a wonderful small staff because we had a member who knew exactly what he wanted to do on behalf of the district.
Yeah.
It's very unusual to have a member of Congress who chairs the Armed Services, the Veterans Affairs, and the House Intelligence
Oh,
Committee.
yeah.
He just
Very rare.
and very, very quietly.
Yeah.
You would never know.
No, he was.
But the
an
delegation
institution.
was different in those
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, one of a
I'm glad I
kind.
could do it.
Well, thank
and
you,
I'm
Lisa.
so thankful for today's opportunity to walk down memory lane.
Good. Well, thank you.
Good. I'm glad that we were able to indulge that opportunity.
And
because we've loved it.
yeah, and just for all of our listeners, take an example. To have Lisa be your example of being a mentor. Find somebody young that you can help, because that's really what it's about.
And be involved in your community.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like I still am on the Central Arizona Project.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you,
All
Lisa.
right.
Thank you.
God
Thank
bless
you.
you.
Thanks.
God
everybody.
bless.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.